Well, good afternoon and good morning. Welcome to our webinar on the North American market for Europe and what 22 is like and what the prospects are for 2023. We are obviously indebted to our sponsors as ever, and our sponsor on this occasion is the North American Marketplace, which is it's now renamed slightly the European Travel Marketplace North America, which is going to be taking place online on the 31st of March. All information about that, including, well, probably excluding Donato Castle, which is one of the great castles of Scotland that's featured on this slide. More information about that is available on the website. That's great. I'll just stop sharing that. And welcome. I would very much pleased that we're being joined by a very distinguished group of guests. We have Terry Dale here from ETOA, Brett Walker from the CATO, the Canadian Tour Operators Association, and our old friend, and they're all old friends of ours, Eduardo Santander from the European Travel Commission, based over in Brussels. So we have representation from the west coast of America. Terry is burning the early morning oil over in Los Angeles. Brett, I believe, is on the east coast of Canada, or towards the east coast of Canada, and obviously Eduardo is based in Brussels. I am here in an extremely wet London. We're going to hear in a moment, we're going to be running through in a moment. Unfortunately, Rachel Reed, who was going to do a quick survey of the data background to this discussion, can't make it at the moment. So I will be taking people through the slides. But when we've done that, we will have a general discussion. Please, if anybody's got any questions or any remarks, please use the question and answer section, which you can see. It really is helpful if you contribute, because it enables us to actually deal with real people rather than one another in whatever for equivalent of a dialogue is. I imagine it's a pottery-log. If I stand to be corrected by anyone who knows better than I do. Right, let me open up the PowerPoint presentation, and we will go from there. One moment. I don't know if you can see that. Is that visible? Maybe not. Hang on. All right. Beg your pardon. Start again. I trust you can see that.
Yeah, we can.
Great.
Yep.
Right, we're going. Right, very quickly, just some background data. The expenditure on outbound travel, as you can see, there's a reasonably catastrophic decline, you can see, from 2019 through to 2020 and 2021. Canada is obviously a much smaller country in terms of population of the United States. What's interesting about Canada is that slightly more people, a greater proportion of Canadians come to Europe than people do from the United States. But it gives you a general feel of what the general expenditure on outbound travel, not just to Europe, but from really to the globe, from these different origin markets are. And it gives you an idea that there was obviously a catastrophic decline in 2020 and 2021. It's also interesting that in Canada, 2021, we've only got data on 21, not 2022, that there was some recovery in the US market. That recovery was not reflected in Canada. And again, this is just emphasizes that the USA was the second most valuable source market, Canada the 7th most valuable. And again, this is just reiterating the point that I've just made. Now, the forecast for outbound trips in North America as a whole looks like only breaking through the 2019 level at the end of 23 and beginning of 24. This is the sort of very, very rough prediction. This is the source. This is prediction from Tourism Economics. I should be able to read this. You can tell that I'm not the person supposed to be giving this presentation. Perceived barriers for taking a long-haul trip, and this is from Eduardo's own survey. The biggest cause now is personal finances. It's worry about the financial situation and the economic situation, whether or not their finances can stretch to a long-haul trip from North America if they are if there is real inflationary pressure or a recession. This is something that's really the biggest concern that people have got. COVID, you'll be interested to see, is still significant, but it's not that significant. And unsurprisingly, given the comparative strength of North American currencies, rising travel costs, and I fear concerns about the environment are not high on people's list of priorities there. Right. This is the commentary which I've just given. And I think that is the end of the slideshow, guys. So I can go back to sharing the screen. Sorry, I'll stop sharing and we can get on with the conversation. I mean, I think none of that is particularly surprising for anybody here. It's interesting to note, and I dare say this will change, how little short-haul travel is prioritized because of carbon footprint. But I just want to start actually just by reflecting, how was 2022 for your market? Terry, do you want to start? How was it in the USA? How did Europe fare in 2022?
So first of all, hello from my hotel room in LA. I apologize for my setting, but I'm going to refer, Tom, to our PwC study that we did last fall. And in that study, we found that our members, our tour operator members, indicated that they had recovered 87% of what they had in 2019. And obviously, we continued to use 2019 as that kind of benchmark. So to get to 87% of that by the fourth quarter of 2022 is very encouraging. I'd also like to touch on the most recent data that came out this morning, just an hour ago. So the consumer price index in the US went from 7.1% down to 6.5%. And while that is still too high, the Federal Reserve wants to get that number down to 2%, the trajectory is encouraging. Unemployment here in the US is at 3.5%, which is low. So all in all, we ended 2022 encouraged and hopeful and feel pretty darn optimistic about 2023.
Good. How much of the 2022 demand, if I just may ask, how much of that was driven by people carrying tour credits over from 2020? We know a lot of people, in 2020, we forget, but 2020 was due to be a record year for North Americans visiting Europe. Right. And we were looking forward to making hay, how wrong we were. But a lot of those people did stay back and then deploy it in 22. Was that a major driving factor? 87%.
It certainly was a driving factor, but regrettably, I don't know the specific response to, and maybe Brett has a better idea coming from an actual tour operator. I don't know what the breakdown percentage-wise was between cashing in on credits as opposed to new bookings. So I don't have the answer to that.
Brett, you have. I ought to mention to the audience, you have two hats, of course. You're both chairman of Cato, but you're also a senior executive at Collect, which is one of the big and very distinguished tour operators who bring people to Europe. What's your take on this?
Well, I think I can only add that definitely the numbers were inflated from what they would have been, I think, because of the tour credits. People definitely cashed in because they were restricted in many cases to a certain period of time. But beyond that, it's very difficult to know to what extent.
Mhm. And how was 22 from Canada?
Well, I think it's important. The context was very, very different, Tom. And I noticed from your slides, obviously no recovery at all in 2021. Canada, compared to the US, experienced the pandemic very differently. And obviously a lot more controls. It's easy to forget that in January, so a year ago, this time period, in January 3rd, the largest source market in Canada, Ontario, and Quebec, went back into lockdown. All restaurants, all restaurants, bars were shut and locked. That was on January 3rd. It was I'm just looking at my dates. It was through the course of January till January 23rd, 26th. Prior to that, it was extended through until February 17th. So at this time last year in 2022, Quebec and Ontario were in lockdown. It's not a great environment for considering or booking travel. And on top of that, in 2022, and believe me, I'm much more optimistic. This is behind us, right? But we have to remember that in Canada, similar to the US, there were restrictions in terms of returning to Canada. We had the PCR testing within 72 hours prior to returning to Canada until April 1st for everyone, whether you were vaccinated or not. And Terry, I think you'll probably agree, for a lot of people, it wasn't so much the return testing that was a concern, but it was what happens if we test positive while traveling. In Canada, you were required then at that point to quarantine for 10 days before returning. And that just, for a lot of people, that was a big turnoff. So that was 2022. And as a result, numbers to Europe, I'm sure, and everywhere from Canada were extremely low, because we really only experienced the recovery in the beginning of third quarter, really. 2023 is going to be a very different year, I'm sure, and we'll get to that. But 2022 was a tough year because of the context in which we had here.
And Tom, I might just add, in addition to what I said earlier, so from our PwC study, what we learned was what the traveler spent was 9% higher per traveler in 2022, and the price per package was up almost 12%. Now, keep in mind, obviously, the cost to our tour operators to assemble the package and all the different elements also increased. But travelers spent more and seemed to be okay with that.
Tom, we cannot hear you.
Yep.
Eduardo, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, well, let me start greeting you all, wishing you all the best for 2023 and beyond. So good afternoon from Brussels, and yeah, I have some notes here that you're gonna be allowed to go through, because it's important so to put some context or some canvas about the information that Brett and Terry had shared already about the recovery of the market. Of course, there is a recovery, but it's a gradual recovery, and it has a few small print there that we have to take into account, particularly when it comes to inbound tourism or outbound, US outbound into Europe. So numbers that, Tom, you partially have shared is that Europe had a 21.4% share of the total US outbound travel. That it's still below what it used to be back in 2019. And however, we expect that kind of an annual average of 33% or something like that, which give us a lot of hope, and we think that the recovery is still ongoing, but we haven't reached the maximum potential of the market, it's very much depending on very external factors. Who were the best or the best performing destinations? And here is what I would like to pick your brains to, because we in our latest report and our latest available figures for 2022, the higher amount of arrivals from the United States compared to 2019 were Turkey, Portugal, Montenegro, Lithuania, and Poland. which are not particularly like hotspots in in a travel brochure. They are somehow new destinations for many travelers. So it smells to me also there's a little bit of diaspora mix there in the equation, and definitely accessibility, air access, and also probably value for money. This is all interpretation, but again, we have to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. So taking into account where we were and where we are, we're still down by 15% in Europe. We're still missing 15% of the American travelers coming to Europe. And as mentioned in your presentation, the drivers of this new demand are the availability of bargains and attractive deals, fully lifted travel restrictions, and I see obviously flexible cancellation policies. We look with interest, but also with sorrow, the latest development in America of, yesterday, all the problems with the airlines and, the system being down. That obviously has a technical impact, that has a logistic impact on the airlines, but also has an impact on travelers when they plan and say, okay, this is a hassle, maybe I should not travel. And moreover, the weather events, recent weather events with the blizzard in the East Coast. So you see, we are looking into an emotional and a very practical and factual point of view. And this, the truth is somewhere in between. Let me also give you a few other indicators. In terms of traveling around Europe, what they did in Americans, they appreciated full service flights. Train passes, for instance, is something that it's booming among American travelers. They see that they don't want to, once they have gone through the hassle of an airport and maybe airline problems or weather conditions, they don't want to see an airport for a good while. So they prefer to move using ground transportation within Europe, meaning train and rented cars. And there is an increase that by 30% in train usage and also 31% of rented cars, which, gives also an impression on how people also move around. And when we talk about American travel, multi-destination package and traveling, it is, used to be very interesting, but maybe it's now a little bit changing. Main interest: cultural history, 41%, city life 30%, nature 28%. You remember during COVID time, people wanted to be in the outdoors. They wanted to be very far away from crowds and big city centers. That seems to be now balancing itself automatically. And the main barrier, as Tom already mentioned, are personal finances. So, people are still struggling, with debt. A lot of micro enterprises, small, medium-sized companies are owners, and self-employed people, still have to pay back a lot of the debt created during the pandemic years. With regards to Canada, I'm sorry for the long interventions, it's just to give you the notes that I have here. Europe had a 19.9% share of total Canadian outbound travel, so around 20% too, which is a very promising figures. Very high expected annual growth by 48%, and we still to have that share even to go a little bit down around 15%. So again, another destination that was very popular among Canadian travelers was Turkey. Turkey again had a very, very good air connectivity even during pandemic. So you see how also the competitiveness of destination has to do also with their connectivity and also with the routes that were canceled and that they've been now reestablished or not. In terms of drivers to travel to Europe from Canadian, we say again, a lot of interest on availability of flexible cancellation policies and bargains and deals. We see that, there is at the beginning, there was a lot of deal hunting and see, what value can I get for my money there. Analog to the American traveler, very much interest on culture and history by 40%. And city life and gastronomy experience by 28%. Main barrier as well for the Canadian market is personal finances. So see, I think long story short here is we're not completely out of the woods with regard to recovery. There's potential, but there is also competition, increased competition locally in the marketplace. So people may also prefer to travel within the North American continent because it's maybe less hassle and maybe cheaper. Also competitors in the region, like in South America, or even long haul to Southeast Asia, or even other Asian destination. So there is a lot of opportunity, but I think, and this is something that we're working with our members, is that we cannot sleep and wait for the American traveler and the Canadian traveler, to come back automatically and to be happy as they were before. So there is a long way to prepare and to change and to adapt.
So, Tom, I would add a slightly different narrative to what Eduardo provided us, because clearly personal finances rank high within the U.S. traveler. However, our research last fall through MMGY showed that travel disruptions were the highest barrier over personal finances. So what we witnessed here in the States yesterday with the FAA grounding all flights for almost 2 hours, that's the biggest fear for our traveling public here in the US. So absolutely, personal finances are right up there. But above that, at least based on our research, were travel disruptions. And how do you manage that? And it's that uncertainty that I think is a real challenge for the US traveler, but it's not going to stop them. But I think that's interesting, because I would not, personally, I would have guessed that personal finances would have been number one, but it wasn't. It was travel disruptions.
I think also, the latest travel disruption were not measured by our research studies and so on. So that's true. It all happened very recently. And we do think that in less waves of questionnaires and surveys, they will pop up very high on the results. I think also that there are external and internal factors. Some are very external to us. Whether it's what it is, there's climate change and involved in all this that obviously is very present in the mind of the travelers too. There's a change of attitude, habit, and also expectation of what it can be, while not traveling less but traveling better. And this is a narrative also that I think the whole industry has adopted, with success or not such a success yet, but it's something that is here to stay. And here is where, at least in Europe, we're very much trying to adapt, not to the narrative as a greenwashing mechanism, but rather to really question how we've been selling Europe to the North American continent in the last 40, 50 years, and how we should start moving on from now. And this is, I think, the biggest challenge that we have, that, also the American population from a demographical point of view is changing day by day. The politics is ever changing. So it's an environment that it's definitely not very static. On the opposite, it's very dynamic, and it requires also agility at destination, from the supply. And Tom will probably witness that among the ETOA members, and you, Terry and Brett, probably you see that there's never been such a disruptive environment, even in a few weeks that we happen to be okay. And people will continue to travel, but it's becoming trickier and trickier and trickier. While we were a few years, we were focusing more on seamless and trying to do things very easy, but things become something out of the blue without warning, very difficult.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, I think Brett, we branched off into an interesting area of discussion, which is the nature of the beast of a webinar. Do you think these perceptions of disruption are fair, or is this shared in Canada, or what's your position on this?
There's no doubt that disruption as well as the inflationary pressures are real, right? I don't think that both to Terry's point and Eduardo's, it will change behaviors, I think, more than it will change whether people travel or not. One of the things that we look at wearing my tour operator hat is what we call over-under bookings. And it's essentially what people book and how much. And we find that in a very disruptive market, consumers are much more likely to book to rather than disperse their bookings over multiple suppliers, there would be a higher concentration in terms of what they book. They'll book the tour, they'll book the air, they'll book the insurance, they'll book the pre-post, whatever. That's one signal. But I just think on putting on a positive hat, Eduardo, you mentioned that the markets are down around 15%, and through some consultations that we've done here at Cato, we're finding Cato members right now are trending anywhere between 10 and 20% off the booking pace of 2019. So, but it's trending faster. So as we look at that trend, if you'd asked me say a month ago, it would have been different. It's speeding up, and we expect that graph you showed, Tom, we are right in step with a full recovery somewhere toward the end of 2023, maybe 2024. But even though we're trending behind, and I say we collectively, this is what we're all talking about, we may be anywhere between 10 and 20% off the pace. And this is generally, but it would be reflected in European bookings as well. The paces people are booking, we expect that we will have a full recovery to whatever extent people measure that be. Most of it is revenue, passengers, whatever. Booking windows have also been restored, which is a really healthy sign. We found that through the pandemic, and this was again reflective of all of our members, the booking window had shrunk. If people were booking in 2022, and this is ex-Canada, it was 4, 5 months, sometimes 3 months, rarely, but usually more typically around the 4 or 5 months before travel. It's been restored. So the booking window right now for Europe is somewhere around a 230, 240 day booking window for tour operators. Generally, that's around 8 months prior to travel. And the look to book is, somewhere 3 months before that, 3 to 2 months before that. So that booking window is a very healthy sign. And generally, I think that, again, we've had a much more restrictive environment here in 2022. We do not have those restrictions anymore. So yes, while the incident yesterday is troubling and we have issues with lift out of Canada, I don't think that's going to stop people. Eduardo, you mentioned the competitiveness of the market, and that is very real. There's no doubt. In 2022, for example, most tour operators did not have any travelers going to Australia, South Pacific, Asia. Those markets have been restored and people are traveling there. And so it's a reality. More people are traveling though. And the countries like the Baltic states, Lithuania, Turkey that you mentioned, I think that may be a factor other than the friends and family and whatnot. I think in terms of a tour operator perspective, certainly for the last few years, you were producing product which was safe. And safe, I mean market safe, right? You knew people were, if they were going to travel, they would consider Italy, Ireland, these are safe bets. However, with the market demand now is beyond that. And so you're having a lot of companies who are coming into market, tour operators who are coming into market with Baltic states, the Balkan states, Turkeys, and Africa, which again increases the competitiveness of Europe. Europe will always be never say never, right? I mean, you never know, but certainly, yeah, you can't make any assumptions in this business, and you can't guarantee anything. But Europe is obviously number one.
Precisely, this is what it's happening here too, because when I mentioned competitiveness, I mentioned it at destination level and also at supply level, because for the time being, we had only the American market really long haul coming to Europe, North America, meaning US and Canada. But now, we are facing also the reopening of China, for instance. So there is going to be competition also for supply, and to ensure rooms, to ensure obviously tickets for attractions and so on and so on. So you see, there's not going to be like a free run of only unilaterally flights from one part of the world into Europe. So we think that the recovery is going to be now multi-market driven, and there is then the picture may change too, because some markets don't mix very well either, in some destinations. And, without open a controversy where and how, in Europe, we traditionally had this market mix of, some destinations being very specialized in Asian markets, some others being in American markets, but others being very mixed. And this is sometimes when problems arise, where you have too many people at the same time in the same places, and where you have this conjunction of perfect storms, and so on. So not diverting from the topic US today, but we have to take into consideration that it's not only US open now, it's the world opening also to travel, and some destinations haven't been traveling for 3 years now, some places. So the pent-up demand is going to be now a little bit balanced, and let's see also how destinations will react to this.
Eduardo, I feel we're getting, this is fascinating. We're going slightly off piste here. I think that just to double check, you cited all sorts of interesting data. Is that available through the ETC website?
Yes, it is. Mostly
Okay.
all our research is available to you all.
Fantastic. So that's free on the ETOA, on the ETC website. There's also information on the ETOA Insight page. There's ETC and ETOA, and we will also be putting the slide presentation that you saw at the beginning up with a recording of this webinar later on our website. So it's all available there.
And Tom,
yeah.
I would just offer to provide our executive summary from our PwC study to have on your website available to your members. We share so many members, what's ours is yours.
But Terry, ladies and gentlemen, you heard this here first, but thank you very much indeed, Terry. It's a very generous offer.
No, happy to.
Okay, right. Now, I think if I can just put my own reflection on 2022 before we go into 2023, is just to say that disruption in the service economy has been a global problem, not just in Europe, not just in North America. The whole service economy on a global level had to recover from being effectively non-existent for 24 months and then jump right back into being fully operational. And we had horrific problems at airports, from Australia through to North America, throughout Europe, everywhere throughout 2022. We had real difficulties breaking up. I think these are gradually behind us. I'm not saying there's going to be no problems in the future, as we saw with the close down for 2 hours the other day, and there will be problems, I'm sure, in the future. But I think the problems of recovering from, we had the problems of COVID, and then the problem of recovering from COVID. We are well on the way to solving the problem of recovering from COVID. There are still difficulties. There are still hotels in Europe which are not opening full capacity because they simply can't find the staff. There's all sorts of examples. There's also the huge disruption, and it's not, I don't want to exaggerate it, but it exists, of refugees occupying some of the hotel space in Europe. The amazing thing about 2022 is the comparative insignificance of the war in Ukraine. Those of us who grew up in '86 and 2001, 2001-2, 2010-11, the idea of a land war in Europe, seeing a recovery of demand is just incredible. And it speaks buckets to the maturity of the American market, North American market, towards comparative risk. In the old days, people would have been frightened immediately at such a prospect. Now people can measure the comparative risk posed by such things and act accordingly. And this, I think, is the most heartening message from 2022, that we didn't see a mass panic. I thought this was incredible. Right, 2023, guys. What's it looking like? I'm going to start again with Terry. What do you think? We've heard full recovery 23-24, but is there anything in particular you want to draw attention?
Yeah. So I'll just go back to our research of our active members, which are the tour operators. So 8 out of 10 of our tour operator members are indicating optimistic to significant growth in 2023. And we define that as 7 to 10% increases in sales. So they're very optimistic. And then when I look at our consumer research, the consumer is telling us that they're willing to spend 16% more in 2023 than they did in 2019. And they're going to go from 2.2 international vacations to almost 4 in 2023. So between our tour operators' optimism and consumers saying we're going to travel internationally more than we did in 2019, and clearly Europe for USTOA members dominates our top 20 destinations, countries, I'm pretty darn bullish. I think obviously we could wake up tomorrow and find something that we didn't anticipate and throws all this off kilter. But right now, we think things are promising.
Right.
Yeah, to dovetail on what Terry said, there's a word in the industry we don't like to talk, we never like to use, and it's called event. We never want an event. And Tom, you referenced a few of those for, I've been with my current employer for about 30 some odd years, and there's been events from time to time, Gulf War I, Gulf War II, 9/11, ash clouds, you name it, they happen, right? We are very, very resilient. I'm extremely proud of our industry, especially through the pandemic, that we have, with a lot of support, and that support being both government support as well as, quite frankly, and Terry will agree, members coming together to support each other through this, which we'd never seen before. And that's reflected in the survey that USDOA does every few years. We will be doing our own. We've replicated what USDOA is doing with a lot of help from USDOA. We will be doing a survey at the end of 2023, to see whether our predictions are correct or not. We've delayed doing it because the recovery ex-Canada is much slower. Be happy to share that with you as well in executive summary. What's happening, I think, in Canada is Canada has had, in 2022, Canada had one of the highest growth rates in terms of the G7. Quite frankly, the economy is growing, is growing very quickly. We've been welcoming, in 2022, I was reading in recent StatsCan that Canada welcomed almost 500,000 new permanent residents. So the economy is growing, the population is growing, the health, there's a lot of factors, but unless we have a major event, and I wouldn't expect that to happen, I hope, I would suggest that the recovery is we're not only going to have the recovery that we're talking about, but there's going to be strength in that recovery. That's what really excites me, that this is not fleeting, that we are all struggling right now to staff, yes, but when we're finding staff, we're finding good staff. If you're retaining them, they're good staff. We're building back stronger. And for those of us who have been through these events before, this was the biggest one we've ever experienced. And it's taken it's been the most work to climb out of. But I often say to people that it's not just about the recovery, it's how you build back. And I feel that the industry is building back with great strength. So it will be sustainable, even if there is another event, barring any major catastrophic event. I think we are in for a very good next few years in terms of travel from Canada to Europe and elsewhere.
Excellent. Eduardo, is there any predictions for 23 you want to make?
I share obviously the hope and the optimism of Terry and Brett here. Obviously, we cannot predict the future. The external factors will always remain there. I just want to underline the issue of climate and climate events, which are the things that are less predictable right now, and also more worrisome because it will affect and also will create competitive advantage for some places and competitive disadvantage from some. So my point here is, while there is a lot of hope, and I'm sure we're going to have again a record year, a record summer, and so on, we have to look into the future with a sense of care too, that maybe, this will not last forever. And if that's the case, I think companies, suppliers, DMOs, and so on, they should start thinking of, crisis management, resilient problems, start investing also in less sunny days. And this is not a pessimism that I mean, it's just, like in every individual household, you also have a little cushion there for the day that the washing machine breaks, or when an event happens also to you that is unforeseeable. And this is my only note here, that I think we all have to have that kind of willingness to invest, willingness to try things that maybe we haven't tried before, like suppliers offering new destinations, maybe risking a little bit, but also being conscious that every risk comes also with a threat, that maybe if you don't have your means under control and your budgets and so on. So hope, growth, but with that kind of with care, what I would like to say, let's be also not naive and say that the problems of the world are not the problems of tourism, because we are the first recovering, but also the first falling when things go wrong.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Eduardo. I'm conscious that time is moving on, and we've got some questions here. I want to tackle the questions before I pose one or two last questions of my own. Someone's posted very kindly a question which says, we have some concerns about the ease and costs of flights from North America, UK and Europe. Is there any, we're getting noise, background noise, but that's neither here nor there. What the further points that they're raising, but I think that's the salient one, other than the question governing the Olympics. It might be an idea if you're not talking, just to mute yourself, because we're getting some background noise there. I just wonder, Terry, have you got any take on the progression of flights to North America in the airlift?
Honestly, Tom, I don't. And the cost factor in reality hasn't deterred the US market from going to Europe and other places in the world. Mm-hmm. We had Airlines for America at our conference in Austin this past December. They're pretty darn bullish. And so, I mean, I don't think we're going to see any kind of reduction. I think if anything, we'll see capacity potentially increasing, but I don't have an exact number or percentage, but certainly the cost has not deterred the US traveler. They're going to go to Europe.
And is that a reasonable generalization for the Canadian travelers, Brett?
Yeah, I think that's not one of my big worries. I would only add that from Canada, it's a totally different country with limited major gateway. And so travel from secondary gateways has become not only expensive, but difficult. We don't have the girth of carriers that the US does to Europe. And so we're limited. But ultimately, it's not anything that I think members are too worried about. It's a concern, but it's not a worry.
I think that generally looking at airlift into Europe is a topic almost for another webinar, because it's something where we need some specialist experts to come and talk to us about it. But I think it's very, very worthwhile raising that. The same question posed, the question about what about the flights costs of flying into Paris during the Olympics. The Olympic Games and tourism is one of ETOA's specialist subjects. I would just mildly point out that you're quite right to be concerned about it, but that will only start impacting things in 2024, not in 2023. And again, I think we will have another webinar on the potential impact of the Paris Olympics, and watch this space. There is, I think, still on the ETOA website, all the various controversies that were kicked off by the London Olympics, which I really do feel old now. It's nearly 12 years ago, but it's very rare that the Olympic Games does anything other than disrupt normal tourism flows. The other question is, do you think there's any difference in terms of recovery between the economic groups? I mean, is the luxury end recovering better, or is the economy end recovering better? Brett, why don't I start with you? The bona fide luxury element on the panel.
I think I think that's a fair, I definitely think that obviously it's a given that the inflationary pressures that we've all talked about are going to have less of an effect on the luxury market. But again, I'm not sure, Tom, if I have too much data on that, other than that's my assumption. So I'll leave it at that. I'm sorry, I don't have much more than that.
Right. And Terry, is there have you got an angle on this?
Yeah, I don't have anything as far as luxury versus economical travel, but I will say this. Our research has shown us that the boomers, not surprising, are willing to spend significantly more than the millennials.
Yeah.
But that stands to reason. So there's nothing revealing about that, but boomers are prepared to spend more. And that would probably be more in that luxury category that you referenced.
And certainly when we covered this on one of our earlier North American webinars last year, the representative from very much a bespoke luxury end was very, very confident that her clients were resilient, far more than the, how can I phrase it, far more than the tourist class traveler, if I may use that term. Which is probably not the right term, but far more than the economy end. I wish we had data to answer that question slightly better, but it's as good as we can get. Eduardo, did you have an angle on?
Well, I have an angle, but I have some common sense here, which is the fact that prices will continue to rise, year after year, decade after decade, and there is economic and financial explanations for that. But what we've learned in the past is, and also from the economic analysis, of the broader population, is that even during pandemic, the rich became richer, not poorer, during pandemic. So the luxury travel segment is pretty much sure, because even during pandemic, it didn't stop really spending. They found also their ways to travel by private jets, or like spending their money in a different kind of accommodation, or private accommodation, and so on. But another undeniable truth is that people, although prices will be probably going higher and higher over the years, people will not like to save on holiday. This is like, it's something that it doesn't mix well. Going on holiday is a hedonistic, egoistic act. So if you want, it's an action that you do it, not for the sake of need, but for the sake if you want to, please yourself or please your family or please your friends. And I think there is a little bit of social psychology here. People are willing to save in something else, but not they're not willing to avoid or actually cut their holiday time or their holiday experience.
I think this is a webinar that just seems to radiate out into alternative discussions. I think there's a massive discussion to be had on price elasticity and client behavior. Dating from my days as a tour operator, which I realize now is a very long time ago. The old adage was that people would switch supplier for a $5 difference in price if they perceived the quality to be similar. And it meant that pricing.
There is a differentiation with those times and now times. People are able to compare and able to shop by themselves on their phones, and there is a lot of information outside there. And I think that price is no longer such a huge deterrent for choosing or not to go on holiday or not. I think it became a little bit like almost a consumer good or a social right, as we call it in Europe. Something that people are willing to save somewhere else in their lives.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's heartening. It would be great to see some real evidence on it. I'm not questioning you. I'm just simply saying that the sort of binding importance to negotiate in order to ensure your clients and your marketing departments are given the right price and the right budgets to play with remains a sort of binding concern. But this is not the discussion now. But I think there are so many things we can raise out later on. Brett, your point about decision lead time, as we used to call it, or booking windows, as you refer to it, absolutely fascinating. This is what drives the industry. But we have another question here, which is simply,
Hey, Tom.
Sorry, Terry.
Yeah, I just, unfortunately, I have to drive to my next meeting in LA.
Oh.
So I'm gonna have to regrettably jump off.
Okay, Terry.
But thank you.
Take care. Thank you so much for
Yes.
joining us. I have
Yes.
to say I was about to wind up anyway, so thank you, Terry.
Okay, thank you.
Brett, Eduardo, whilst Terry's gone, it's literally a question of do we know what the length of stay, average length of stay of a North American tourist in North America is? My old memory from research from many years ago was about 10 days, but do you know what the average length of stay is off the top of your head, Eduardo?
Yeah, it's a little bit shorter than 10, but it's not far away from it. So it's around 9.2 or something like that. So it's it's a figure that it's a bit fresh in my head because it hasn't changed much because nobody crosses the Atlantic, for a weekend or just a few,
Yeah.
especially for leisure purposes. You cross it for maybe for business and so on, but very little will spend the money just for a few days,
And just to add to that, I believe the average number of countries visited per visit is around about 2.4, 2.5.
Yeah, it used to be three, but it's now below 3 because like also destinations are working hard to retain their loyal visitors. Yeah.
Brett, is there anything you wish to add?
No, other than the fact that, again, I don't have any hard data on this, but we have several members who have data who have shared, Keto has several members that have shared data, and I can speak more generally with the fact that Canada is a small market. Obviously, we have less than 40 million people, but they are avid travelers. And what I've been told by many of the tourism board members that we have is while Canada may rank very low in terms of numbers of passengers, they rank very high in terms of length of stay and money spent. So I think it's a misnomer to think that despite the fact that obviously we're not in the market, we don't have 350 some odd million people that the US has, we've got a fraction of that, but yet in many categories it's a very, very important market in terms of length of stay and money spent.
Well, I mean, according to UNWTO data that we had, Canada is the 7th most important international source market for Europe. That means it's in the top 10, and they spent $35 billion, which is not a small sum of money. So it's important not to be underrated, and it's why we're here, and it's why we've had this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, we're reaching the end of our allotted time. Thank you very much for your questions. I hope we've answered them all. I just double check if there is another one there. I think there was one about, is there any specific concrete way you can grab, reach the target willing to travel and really experience a destination, in this case, Italy. I think the question is, if I get it right, and I may be being obtuse, it's, can you think of any really salient point you would use to try and persuade someone to come to Europe or to a specific destination? What would you say? Eduardo, have you got an idea how you would answer that? What's your one-word selling point for a European destination?
Definitely the variety of destinations and the value for money. It's there. It's really there, and people want a really unique experience that you get also cross border here very easily.
Brett?
I'm less of a marketer. One word is very difficult.
Okay.
I think
as many as you like, don't worry.
Certainly, as Eduardo mentioned, everyone has to have a very poignant selling advantage or value. People are looking for different things, whether it's worry over climate change, sustainability. We are having an increasing number of people who are looking to do tours back to back. We suspect that may be part of the rationale, that avoiding trips over the Atlantic. That will change supply on our end. If that continues, we begin to see that. Safety, security, convenience, all of these things come into the equation in a somewhat disruptive world. But people are not going to stop traveling. They're just going to figure out how to do it best. And I think that could be a lot of words.
I think my answer to that question was just if you're trying to sell Italy, point out that you can only experience Italy in Italy. It is not something you can do anywhere else. And it is the crucial point about marketing any destination is emphasize it's very, very difficult. It's impossible to replicate it elsewhere, despite various attempts in Las Vegas and Macau. All right, Brett, Eduardo, in absentia, Terry, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, audience, for staying with us this long. I look forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.